Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Martin. I am a Sidebar member here. And if you're not familiar with Sidebar, I'm just going to introduce you. Sidebar is a private invite and exclusive leadership program for those in tech and product. We are here to help accelerate your career and mitigate the loneliness that leaders can experience as they start to elevate in their careers. We're all here based upon being generous givers, truth, transparency, and authenticity. So we have the people, processes, and the technology and the platform to drive impact in your growth. And come join us if you're interested. You can find us within sidebar.com and also in Sidebar and LinkedIn. And today I'm excited to introduce or to have Lauren introduce herself and talk a little bit more about her leadership framework. So Lauren, do you want to go ahead and talk a bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you for having me, Sidebar, and welcome everyone from both inside and outside Sidebar. I'm also a Sidebar member. I was an OG, so I'm on year 3 and loving it. And before I introduce myself, if you haven't noticed already, there is a QR code and a link here on the slide. Go ahead and download your personal playbook of one. We're going to be going through this during the workshop today, and you're definitely going to want it. It takes less than 60 seconds. And while you're doing that, maybe grab like a notebook and a pen or just something to take notes with, because we're going to be doing some live exercises as well. So I'm Lauren, and I am a career strategist and leadership coach and founder of Founder by Design. And I've been a lot of things in my career. I'm actually a trained physicist, and then I spent 20 years in communications and marketing roles at deep tech and science organizations. So I've done a sort of lot of things. I spent the last 10 years in startups as a founding marketer. I took one of those startups public in 2022. I took another role in a deep tech startup. And earlier this year, I got probably like some of you in the room, and you're faced with this moment of what next? And I kind of did the normal thing. I went to LinkedIn, I started looking at the job postings and the opportunities, and I was searching for head of marketing, head of comms. And as I was reading these job descriptions, I started realizing that they all sounded exhausting. It was more of the same. It was like something that I was like, I've been there, I've done that. I don't really know if I want to do it again. And I surprised myself by thinking and saying out loud, I wonder if I could work for myself, which is not something I had ever thought would be on my path. But since the beginning of this year, that's what I did. And I first started out doing consulting and fractional work in my area of expertise, which is deep tech marketing, and working with founders, to set up their communications and marketing strategies to help them, have their founder-led communications, their LinkedIn, like that sort of thing. And the more I was working with these people, the more I was realizing I was helping them more as individuals than as communicators. And it was a lot of overcoming imposter syndrome or limiting beliefs, or making the transition from engineer or PhD to CEO and leader, and wondering if they could hack it or if they had what it takes. And so I started to transition really into focusing my work on that intersection of personal and professional, and really rejecting this idea of playbooks, of you have to be a certain way to be successful, of you have to post on LinkedIn 5 times a week, and you have to communicate in this way, and you have to have these types of stories, or you have to have this narrative to be successful, or your pitch deck has to look exactly like this. And I started really diving deep on how can we sort of own our careers as individuals. And that's the focus of my work now. I'm going to move away from this screen, but Kim, if you want to just pop the link in the chat, so as people are coming in, they can still have it, and I'll flash it again about halfway through. So if you don't have it, and then I also want to pause before we move on. If anyone's having trouble or have questions about getting this report, feel free to also drop that in the chat, and we can get you situated. Cool. So My core belief is that the future of work is personal. And for those of you who are at Sidebar, like, you care deeply about your career and the impact you want to make. And many of you might be here because you're in transition and you're wondering what next. And we're in an age of profound technological advancement and disruption, which I probably don't have to explain to most of you. Like, jobs and skill sets that we've honed over the past decade or 2 decades are quickly becoming obsolete or automated by AI. The skill sets of the future probably haven't been invented yet or are currently being developed. And so if you take away all those hard skills, like, what is left? And what's left is like you, is your essence, right? We can all learn new skills. We can all have different titles. But what happens when you take that title away, when you decouple your identity from the title you have or the role you're in or the company you're in or what your org chart looks like and your place in it? Like, who are we when we're no longer defined by what we do, but instead who we are? And so some of you might be noticing some of these shifts. And let me know in the chat. And I should say, like, I love the chat. I don't want to talk at you for an hour. So, like, light my chat up and respond and let me know, like, if things are resonating for you or not. Because these are some of the shifts that I have certainly felt in my own journey and through talking with so many of people in Sidebar and elsewhere. We're really seeing this shift from a focus on the collective to a focus on the individual. And what does that look like? So for hundreds of years, we have sort of had this productivity as virtue, right, in our society, that we were dependent on collective planning and systems and growth and expansion, and the individual's work and contribution was the primary means of survival for the collective, for those groups, right? And so we contributed in and we got out, right? We got education, we got healthcare, we got, growth and prosperity. And we're starting to see some of those systems really break down. Let me know if you're feeling any of them in particular, but we're especially seeing, there was like that era of explosive, unfettered growth in tech, and now we're kind of seeing that with mass layoffs. And so people are starting to sort of feel like, okay, I need to be in this for me, right? Like, who am I going to be, if these systems no longer exist? There's also been a focus on this like rigid logic and planning. If you're like me and you kind of like entered your career maybe between like the late 90s and the mid 2000s, we were sold this idea of, go to college, get an entry-level job, climb the ladder, go into management, go into leadership. And this really like focus on information and the mind and logic and rational thinking. And somewhere along the way, that sort of stopped being the case, right? And so maybe many of us still kind of harbor that, our resumes can't have a role less than 2 years because no recruiter will take us seriously, right? If we like didn't follow a certain path. But we're kind of coming into this place, especially if you're hitting mid-career, we're kind of pausing and saying like, well, wait a minute, am I even on the right path? Is this even what I want to be doing? And pausing to think about, what should I be doing instead, or what can I be doing next? We also found belonging through kind of pre-existing groups, whether it was cultures, religions, families, and we sort of had to conform in order to feel that sense of belonging. And we're starting to move away from that into a more selective way of relating to people, finding our chosen families, friends, networks, kind of colleagues, and really choosing people that we align with from a values perspective, a shared mission, and shared connection. Finally, or not finally, but next is this kind of like hero worship and kind of like idolization of celebrity. And if one person is successful, there's always these copycat frameworks, Jeff Bezos's 5-step morning routine or whatever. And that if we could just copy the successful people, like, we can be successful too. And starting to see a shift into that doesn't actually work for me. Like, I'm not into the 4 a.m. cold plunge, right? I want to sleep in and make sure I'm well rested before I start my day, and starting to kind of make decisions for ourselves versus copying what people have done who came before us. And finally, this hustle culture and deferred reward, right? Like this like constant effort, constant action, constant productivity. And maybe we are promised some equity stake that shows up in the future, or we are loyal to a company for a long time and we get a pension, or we eventually retire and we have a nest egg that we can enjoy in the last stage of our lives. And now that's kind of moving toward this meaningful contribution in the now, in the present. What can I do that gives me the sense of personal satisfaction and fulfillment? And let me know in the chat if you're feeling any of these. I know for me, I certainly did when I was kind of like at the end of my corporate career and kind of figuring out what I want to do next and shifting into this, my era of entrepreneurship. And, you know, my initial reaction was to kind of go back and do the same thing, being called back into the old patterns. That's what I'm good at. That's what I'm known for. That's the reputation I spent 20 years building. And we're kind of stuck in this messy middle where, you know, these collective systems still exist, but we're feeling this pull, you know, towards something different, toward how can I make more impact as an individual, but still getting pulled, you know, kind of stuck in between both. And I call these like our legacy loops. And so what it is kind of like a pattern we repeat when we don't have permission to act differently, or when we don't know what else we could do besides more of the same. And so we feel maybe stuck because we're operating from kind of these outdated structures and outdated playbooks. And so I know for me, when I left my first startup after the IPO, I took some time off and I worked with a career coach, and I was like, I really want to figure out what I want to do next and, you know, how I can make more impact. And it was amazing. And I really enjoyed working with her. And then I got contacted by another startup, and you know, it was the same job. And I initially said no to this startup. I was like, I'm not sure I want to get on this ride again. I just spent 5 years building this function at a startup. I'm tired. I'm not sure if I want to join like another pre-seed, you know, startup, you know, a company of 20 people and get on that ride again. And we kept talking and they were really persistent. And I ended up coming on board and I stayed with them for about 2.5 years. But I knew that it was like not the right fit. And, you know, eventually when I was let go, it was kind of like I did it again. I went back to LinkedIn and I was like, okay, I'll find the next thing. And then that's when I finally broke free. I was like, I really don't want to do this again. I said it the first time and I didn't listen to myself. But now I really mean it. And so we want to break free, but we really only have access to the old playbooks that keep us contained in the old. So let me know in the chat, raise your hand, like how many of you have done one or more of these personality assessments, right? And how limiting they are. DISC, there's 4. You know, Enneagram, there's 9. Myers-Briggs, there's 16. Even if you go Clifton Strengths and there's 34, and you can have like any kind of combination in your top 5, you start to get a little bit more, you know, diverse and you feel a little bit more unique, but still, you know, there's a lot of other people in the world who are exactly like you, right? And all of these tests, you know, they measure different things, but they have one thing in common. They measure you with your mind, and it's based on self-report. And so every time you take one of these assessments, it's sort of fueled by your conditioning, whether that's your childhood or cultural conditioning or the current work environment that you're in, and you're answering these questions like in response to what you're currently dealing with on any given day. It could be, you know, variable based on your mood and whether you had a fight with your spouse that morning. You might find that you answer the questions differently if you're thinking about your work self or your home self, if you're thinking about yourself as a leader or a parent. And so there's actually some statistics that say like up to 75% of MBTI results actually change if you take the assessment more than once, right? And so, and the other thing they do is they sort of like tell you who you are. And they just put a label on you, but they don't actually tell you what to do with that information, right? You're like, okay, great, I'm an introvert. You know, how does that help me succeed in the world? And then you look at biology. And human DNA has 4 to the 3 billion possible permutations. Most of those permutations are junk, but for the 8 billion people in the world, most of us are wholly unique. Even individual or identical twins will express their genes differently as they grow up, as they move through life, as they interact with their environments, their habits, their lifestyles, their choices, right? And so if we're this unique on a biological level, why do we still keep operating and working and leading as though we're one of 4 or one of 9? And so I want to introduce and give us permission to operate from our own playbook. And this is what I call the Playbook of One. And again, if you joined late and weren't able to download it, here's the QR code. If you're on desktop, playbook.laurenrugani.com. It takes about 60 seconds. And this is based on human design, which is a system that combines ancient wisdom with modern quantum mechanics. And it's really about how we are hardwired to move through the world. And just like human biology, every single one is different, even identical twins. And I took this system and I rewrote it a little bit to be relevant in the corporate environment as leaders, as people who want to make impact, right? And so, oops, look at that. You'll see on the first page a chart that looks like this, and they will all look different. This one you see on the screen here is mine, and on the left, these are all the things that this chart can tell you. It's about how we use our energy, how we make decisions, our leadership style as we think we're showing up, and our leadership style as other people perceive us. Our values, our purpose, our strengths, also our kryptonite and our challenges, what motivates us, what drives us, our perspectives on the world, the environments we naturally thrive in, our wisdom, our growth potential, what inspires us, do we have willpower, our fears, how we communicate, what our self-identity is, what we broadcast out versus what we take on from others, and so much more. And so for today, we're just going to focus on these 3 in the interest of time, which I call my 3B framework. And these 3 things represent about 75 to 80% of your overall design. So they're really important. And the first is your unique value. And these are made up of your overarching theme and the kind of unique reason that you are here. So regardless of the role you're in, the title you have, the company you're in, or what your org chart looks like, this is the impact you have, like whatever room you're in. And this is underpinned by 4 unique traits. Your visibility is the environments where you naturally shine. And you might find that, you thrive in certain jobs, in your career and not in others, even though you were kind of doing similar work. And that's because of your surroundings. Maybe they weren't really aligned with your energy. And finally, your voice. This is the liaison between who we are on the inside and how people perceive us on the outside. And so doing the work on the inside to make sure that we're operating at our highest self comes through naturally through our communication. So I want to pause here before we move on, double check. Are there any questions in the chat? Do people have their reports? I just want to make sure that we are good to go.
Hey, Lauren.
Kristen says ready to go.
Yep.
All right, let's go. So I know Sue is not here today, and if you're a Sidebar member, you probably know Sue. And I met Sue at a Sidebar dinner in Boston. And she said this, which made me laugh because it's so true. And I couldn't have put it better myself. When she was figuring out what she wanted to do, she, like I'm sure many of us, said, I was looking for a mission-driven, values-aligned leader to work with. Then I realized that person is me. And let me know in the chat, if any of you have felt that way of we all kind of feel that I want to be in a company doing something that matters. And when we really think about it, we can only do that if we're true to ourselves. So the first thing we're going to look at is our value. So in your reports, you're going to have a page that says your career theme. This is your overarching theme. And again, that underlying why that guides you to your most meaningful roles and work. They're not things like product manager or marketing executive. They're really deeper than that. Some might be about control, either maintaining it for yourself or taking it away from others. Some might be about upholding tradition, while others might be about bringing about revolutionary change. Others might be about caring for and serving others. I would love to know what your themes are in the chat. And I know some of them might have some esoteric names, so you can also drop a phrase like, I am here too. And mine is the theme of laws, serving others. Awesome, Mohammed. And when I first read mine, I was almost allergic to it. I was like, laws? Like, that doesn't sound like me at all. Like, I'm usually the person in the room kind of shaking things up. I'm not one to uphold tradition or, kind of do things the way they've always been done. In fact, that's one of my biggest corporate pet peeves is when you kind of raise a new idea. And Kim, I don't know if we could like mute folks or if someone has a question and wants to come off mute.
Yes, I'm looking for that mute right now.
Okay.
Just keep going.
And right, so I was like, laws, like I kind of like hate laws. I hate rules. I hate being restricted. And I really dislike when people say, we can't do that new thing because we've always done it this old way. We just can't change it. Right. And so I really had to sit with it. And then once I kind of got into what we call the core four, which is on this slide, it really helped me make sense of it. And again, let me know in the chat if others, if you see your themes from your report. I would love to hear what some of you are here to do. And as you look at your report, this will be sort of on each individual page, but to show you where these are coming from, if you look at the chart at the beginning, the first one, the wisdom maven. Mohammed, maybe we can drop the link again for Mohammed. Thanks. So the first number comes from the top number on the right side. You'll see like a line of numbers on the left and the right next to your chart. The first number comes from the top on the right side. This is also known as like your conscious side or your personality side. The second number down is number 2. And then if you go over to the left side, the top number there is number 3, and the second number down is number 4. And so that number 1, like this is your core contribution. And this is sort of like what you are here to do, the role that you're naturally designed to play in any team or any organization. And it helps you really identify like where your talents will be most impactful. So those of you who are looking for roles or kind of figuring out what to do next, like really dive in and try to, really study this and contemplate this. The second number down is your growth trajectory. So that's like kind of the lesson you're here to learn over and over again and integrate throughout your life. And as you learn to integrate this challenge, it really turns into a potential superpower, which helps you grow even further. The third one, again, this is your unconscious side. And this is more about how people see you. So you might not resonate as strongly with things on this side, but if you were to tell someone that you're close with, hey, this is what it says about me, they're probably going to say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And this is really just like the energy that you emanate when you are at your best. Like when you're doing the things that you love to do, you're doing them easily, you're not thinking about them. This is just you in your most natural element. And then finally, number 4, this is kind of that long-term impact, the broader effect, the kind of like legacy sustaining kind of like overall purpose, throughout your life and career. And I would, again, love to hear what everyone, again, your themes or anything that's resonating or not resonating with you. Again, this takes a lot of contemplation, and like kind of sitting with it. And so something I recommend is to do something like this. and not on this. Thanks, Elizabeth. The wisdom maven, the courageous leader, the opportunity expander, and the ambitious mentor. Amazing. You sound like you are a great leader who probably, guides from experience, and kind of helps your team understand based on maybe lessons that you have learned throughout your life and your career. And like I was saying, when I first read mine, you left corporate to do your own thing. Awesome. And then, so maybe that's the impact you have on your clients or your partners. So when I read mine, again, this laws, my core four had almost this inherent tension. Part of it was this, guardian of values, which was meant to uphold tradition in the past. Part of it was about kind of dealing with constraints in the present and limitations. And part of it was about driving forward into the future and innovation. And at first, again, I was like, how am I supposed to reconcile all of these? They almost sound the opposite. But when I kind of put it together, it was, hey, I'm actually that person who can walk the line between preserving what did work and those values and that North Star as we grow and evolve as a group or a team or a community, and making sure that we maintain that anchor, we maintain that North Star as we grow and evolve and change and move into the future. Because also, like, my pet peeve about people saying, we can't do that, we've always done it this way. I'm equally frustrated when there's just change for the sake of change, when it's not anchored in anything, when there's no North Star. It's like when, especially in the startup world, when the strategy seems to pivot by the week and you're like, what are we even doing here? Like, what are we actually working toward, right? I want to read some of these other ones. The Spirit Liberator, the Barrier Breaker. These are amazing. Empowered Force, Spontaneous Speaker. Yes. Purpose Warrior. Sympathetic Caregiver, Influential Leader, Possibility Pioneer. And how are these resonating with you guys? Like, do you feel like this is you, or do you feel like, wow, like I haven't really been working or operating, kind of with these, kind of with these energies? I love these though. Awesome, awesome. Thank you for sharing. The title sounds so fancy. Kristen, yeah, they have the kind of little paragraph on them, but I will get to that at the end if you want some help with like deeper integration. So stay tuned. So this quote I love, and it's often misattributed to Albert Einstein, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. And I love this quote because I had a role in the middle of my career where no matter what I did or how hard I worked, it felt like I couldn't do anything right. I mean, I was working 16-hour days, killing myself, and everything I handed in to my boss, she would say was wrong or not what she asked for. And if I asked for clarity, I got pushback. If I said, if I got something in writing and say, like, this is what you told me to do, she would say, that's not what I meant. And it was just this, just frustrating dynamic we were in. And I loved the team. I loved the company. I loved the culture. But I was just so emotionally broken from it, right? I was like, I don't know if I belong here. And that gutted me because it was a culture known for very high performance and high bar. And I'd always prided myself on being that person. And I was like, I don't know if I can hack it here. And that was partially true, right? The problem was not me. The problem was my environment. I moved on from that role into a different role where I had access to a lot more information, right? I had a boss who was very open with me, who shared a lot with me, who gave me context, who trusted me to make decisions, right? And I thrived. I grew more in 2 years at that company than in the previous 10 years in my career combined because I was given that runway and the support. And so it's really about being in those right environments. And if you kind of go through your report a few more pages, you'll find a description of your natural environment. Something that's not in your report, but we're going to go through it here, is you'll see 4 arrows, and the bottom left one is circled. Let me know in the chat if yours is left facing or right facing. Mine is right facing. Yep, thank you, Kim. Yes, it's the page that says deploy. Perfect, thank you. Right facing, left, 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 left. A lot of lefties, right? Okay. Okay, cool, like half and half. Sounds about right. So just like you can be left-brained or right-brained, you can also thrive in left environments or right environments. And if you have a left arrow, you tend to be a more active participant in your environment, shaping the conditions of your environment. You probably prefer consistency, routine, structure. You probably have a very clean desk or workstation. Everything is where it is and like needs to be. And like if it's, you know, kind of in disarray, you can't get your day started, and you probably have a morning routine, and like you have your coffee or your water or like your 3 beverages, you know, and you probably like working with the same people every day, or like kind of having this like predictable, you feel seen. Yes, I love hearing that. Nicole, you want to look at the bottom left arrow of the 4 in your report. It's the one with like the golden circle around it to make it easy for you on the page that says deploy. And so, Mohammed, these are not people. This is not your left or right brain. This is about your environment. So this is about your environment being very structured, right? And like you probably have a home base, or you work from the same place every day. And like you don't really love if your routine gets disrupted, right? Like you probably structure your calendar. And if you have a right arrow, you're more of a passive observer in your environment. You're connected to it, but you kind of prefer this like kind of hang back, observe what's going on, taking it all in, like you're not ignoring it, but you love variety and flexibility. So you actually might be someone who thrives in a coffee shop or a co-working space where there's like stuff happening around you, maybe not directly interacting with you, but there's just activity going on. You maybe like trying new places, or maybe you work in one place consistently, but every once in a while you're like, man, I just really need to switch it up. And when you do, you find that that's when you might get a creative download, or you get yourself unstuck, or you can think a little bit more clearly. And so you kind of have more flexibility in the environments that you work in. Was there a question? Cool. Okay. And so think about this, whether you have a left arrow or a right arrow, and like how you interact. This is how you interact with your environment. And then you also have a description on that page of the type of environment that you naturally thrive in. So there's 6 of them. I'm gonna go through all of them quickly. You have your own that you can look through. But it's actually really important, I think, to understand what the natural environment is for your team or the other people around you. And so I'll flash the link again at the end, or have it in the chat, but like run these reports for people on your team and see how similar or different you are. And if you're a leader, especially, and you have some control over your space, think about what that might mean for how you set up your environment or your kind of co-working space to enable these natural strengths to come to life. So if you have a number 1 environment, this is very selective. Grounded environments. Cool, Mohammed, that's number 5, so stay tuned. So if you have a selective environment, you probably prefer like working in your own space, kind of closed off. If you have an office with a door, you kind of have your back to a wall, so you can kind of see and manage and maintain like who's coming in and out of your space. You probably enjoy working from home, or like in a cubicle, or like kind of, like a phone booth. If you kind of go into the office, like a place where you can really just have headphones on, really heads down, deep, focused work. And you'll probably thrive in a culture that prioritizes this type of work, clear boundaries. You're not being micromanaged. You don't have daily stand-ups or like constant requests for email updates or reporting or meetings, right? Communication is usually deliberate and scheduled and intentional rather than spontaneous. And so these are some examples of like companies or kind of, environments that you might thrive in. If you have a number 2, you probably thrive again in an environment where ideas are constantly exchanged, but you're not necessarily in the middle of the action. And so again, you might not be at a coffee shop, but you might be in an office with a window looking out over like a courtyard, right? And so you're kind of like a little bit removed from the action, but you kind of like seeing it happening around you. You probably maybe post up in a kitchen or a cafe or a break space where you can just naturally communicate with your colleagues, and you probably find it really natural, or even you really want to interact with people from other departments and just really have this constant exchange of ideas. And so if you're in sales or marketing or therapy, like if you're constantly dealing with clients, you probably really like these types of environments. I saw a question, Nicole, we've been rejected for having a mandatory open floor plan. Yeah, it's awesome. That's amazing that you knew exactly what you needed. I'm so curious what environment you have, if it's a number 1. Or maybe it could be even a number 6 where you kind of like really being kind of far apart. But a number 3 environment really is about these creative environments. And so this could be something where like new things are being cooked up all the time, experimented. It's maybe like in a creative space where there's like a big table in the middle and you all sit around it and there's a lot of brainstorming and ideas. Collaboration and communication there's a mix of formal and informal. Like it's not overly formal and structured and scheduled like in number 1. But there's just, again, that kind of really dynamic and natural energy. So creatives, product, designers, like, again, really where you want to take a lot of ideas in and like process and integrate things. But you also really need to be comfortable in this environment where you feel at ease, where you can take the time to process and integrate. If you have a number 4 environment, this is about being expansive. So you might be someone who like, has this grand idea of like, working from like a cabin at the top of a mountain. You can kind of like look out and see everything. And so your ideal environment is really like where you have a high level panoramic view, big picture view. Again, you're a little bit detached from the activity, but you're not sort of shut away from it. If you go into the office, maybe like you really like being on a high floor with big windows, or if you are in an open office environment, you're sitting by a hallway or kind of like kind of positioned on an edge of the room where you have a like line of sight on the whole thing. Elizabeth, these numbers are the big number. Thanks, good question. And then the smaller number actually feeds into which direction the arrow goes. So we're not going to get into the smaller number now. This is the bigger number, but great question. And so an expansive environment is generally calm, right? So again, you're kind of at the top of the mountain. A lot of activity is maybe happening, but it's not the hustle and bustle of like a city street or a market or a cafe. Danielle, you're for, yes, you're working outside when the weather is nice. Yes, because you feel like that sense of open space, right? That's awesome that you can equate that to a natural environment as well as a physical environment. Number 5, Mohammed, this one's for you. I also have a number 5. So you really like being in a defined space. So not necessarily closed off, but almost think of it, instead of being at the top of the mountain, like you're in the valley at the bottom of the mountain, right? And what happens here is like the flow of information kind of is like funneled in, and you feel like you have this horizontal view of everything, and you really love to be plugged into that flow. And this is what I was talking about with my transition story of a role where I was like kept in the dark and I didn't know what was going on, and I was trying so hard, but I just like couldn't get it right. And then moving into a role where I just like had this, you know, kind of open door to information and context, and I thrived even though I was doing the same job. Right. And so, you know, maybe your desk is on the main floor, right, where the activity is kind of happening, not the high floor. You don't mind background noise, but you want it to be pleasing versus distracting. So you might have a white noise machine, or maybe you have your favorite music on in your headphones. You don't need complete silence, but you need something to be super pleasing. Um, and this culture kind of values rhythms, connections, almost this sense of community where like every single person plays an integral role in the ecosystem, and like and there's a flow of information, it's very transparent, everybody kind of knows what's going on and is able to like do their thing. And then finally, 6, you thrive best in like kind of a blended environment. So this is where like almost like orthogonal, like two types of energies or two types of ideas are coming together. So like R&D, heavy experiment, emerging industries. There's a lot of like change and pivot and perspectives. Your desk might, you know, your desk might face a wall in one direction and a window in the other direction. Or you might kind of be positioned near a doorway or a hallway where you have kind of access to two different you know, workspaces where you can, you know, kind of get different inputs from what's going on. And you're in a culture that really embraces the change and adaptability. You're not suited for things that are bureaucratic and slow and kind of, you know, entrenched in old ways of doing things. Right. And so maybe you're an R&D scientist, or, you know, kind of in a company that doesn't really know what the path forward looks like, but you're figuring out day by day. And not everyone in the culture has the same background. There's like multiple perspectives. Maybe you work in like even intergovernmental organizations, right, where like there's cultural exchange. And so think about this blending. Jessica, you're a 6. I'm so curious, like what is your environment like? And does this resonate with you? Whether it's your physical environment, whether you kind of have, you know, multiple windows facing different directions, or the kind of work that you do where you're kind of taking in things from all places.
This like lands perfectly for me. Like I will stand in my kitchen, and then I'll stand at my desk, and then I'll be outside. Like I move during the day depending on what's going on. And then like I'm happiest in companies that don't know the path forward, that I can like help guide it. So yeah,
Amazing.
like this is totally hits home.
Awesome. I love to hear it. Yeah, anyone else, feel free to pop off mute and share, um, or let me know in the chat if anything is really resonating.
Lauren, is it possible? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Kim.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say resonated in terms of being in a cafe culture. There was a point where I was trying to figure out what I wanted for my next role. And I had this list of like my ideal day. And it was a sense of I want to disconnect from constantly being on Slack, right? Having, as a project manager, program manager, people constantly messaging me or having to be on meetings. So I was like, I want to be in a place where I'm working on work, but it doesn't require me to constantly be online in meetings, and I can work from a cafe. And so, yeah, seeing this, it just makes sense because that's where I thrive, with ambient environments.
I love that. And I love that you know that about yourself and you wrote that down in terms of like knowing what you were going to look for. And like, this is super important. I think I forget who said it in the chat. Maybe it was you, Elizabeth, of, you know, getting rejected from a company because you knew already there was no way you were going to thrive based on how they were set up in their physical environment. And I think that's so important. It's unfortunate that companies do this. And I think when I think about like the debate between remote work and return to office, I'm like, that's so simplistic, right? There's so much more to it. It's not about whether we work best at home or we work best in the environment. It's all of these other details. Do we work best around other people? And then if we are around other people, is it just their ambient energy we need to be around? Is it intentional communication? Is it accidental communication, right? Is it buzzing, 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 being that left arrow again, being like really in the environment and shaping it, or kind of stepping back and just observing it a little bit and like having it around you? Elizabeth, yeah, totally. What energizes us or drains us. And we probably intuitively know this. And this is just helping to put some words to it, to hopefully what we've all experienced in our careers, kind of like knowing what works for us and what doesn't. So our final exercise, we're going to go through this pretty quickly, is when we think of leadership, we often think of the external expression of leadership, right? Like how we show up in rooms, how we communicate, how we lead others, how we compel people to listen and follow. But if we just start there and stop there, we're going to struggle, because everything that we communicate is a product of what's going on inside. And so the things that we went through today, like those values, those strengths, those traits, the environments that you're in, if you're operating in alignment with those, your communication will reflect that, right? It will become more authentic. I think that's like the buzzword of the year is authenticity. And like, what does that even mean? And authenticity is not performative. It's not, it's not being a character. It's not being overly, vulnerable or oversharing. Being authentic is like, I'm actually not thinking about how I show up. I just am showing up because that's where I feel comfortable. And so only through like deeply understanding this about ourselves and accepting this about ourselves can we use our voices in a way that resonates at the highest level as leaders. So for the final exercise, we're going to look at this box is called the Communication Center, and it's the third one down. It's a square, and you'll see these 11 numbers inside of it. And if your box is colored in, it might be gold, it might be gray, it might be blue. But if it's colored in, you have what's called the defined center. And that means you have consistent, kind of reliable access to your voice. You are meant to speak and be heard. You don't really think a lot about what you're saying. It really just comes naturally to you. And I like to use the analogy of like a radio broadcast station, right? Like you choose, you're the DJ. Are you talk radio? Are you playing rock and roll? Are you playing pop? Like you get to choose like what goes on the airwaves. If your center is what's either called undefined or open, if it's white, and I like to think of this as kind of like the receiving end of the radio. Like if you've got a radio in your car still, if you're old school, and if you have certain numbers highlighted, like they are here, I like to think of those as like your presets. So that's kind of like what you're naturally attuned to. So you're really, you're flexible in your communication, and you can attune your voice to like different audiences and use different messages and different channels. But you're also kind of susceptible to like taking on other people's voices and not your own. So some of the work is really understanding like what's yours and what's not. And if you're completely open, if it's white and you have no numbers highlighted, I like to think of this as like you're going on a road trip and your presets in your radio stop working. And so you just have to kind of hit scan, right? And you're just taking in like whatever happens to be on the airwaves, in a 50-mile radius of you. And you kind of are like, no, I don't really like that. Okay, yeah, that sounds good. I'll stick with this for a little while. And so you have a lot more, I think, flexibility and experimentation to find what works for you. And it's important to note that like none of these are better than the other. They're just different expressions of kind of the unique strengths. Again, so again, defined, you're broadcasting out, which again, you have to be careful of, because if you're broadcasting your inner anger or frustration, other people are going to pick up on that. And you might notice that you change the temperature of a room for better or worse, depending on how you show up. And again, if you're undefined, you're very flexible, but you're also kind of susceptible to taking on other people's, what they're bringing into the room. So you'll see a diagram that looks like this. And I know Kim is probably going to pop up a survey in a minute or two. So take the time to do that. And we're going to run through this exercise super quick while that pops up for you guys. These are the different, what's called gates in your communication center. And so if you have any of them highlighted, you could have none, you could have one or two, you could have multiple. Elizabeth, you're defined with 20 and 33. Awesome. And then you'll see this legend at the bottom, kind of color coded. And this is what's called a thematic. And so if you're detail oriented, you'll notice that the ones that are kind of in teal on the left-hand side, these correspond with like your communication is about sharing logic, information, fact, knowledge. The light blue on the right side, if you're right-brained, right, this is about kind of sharing in the abstract, your experiences, subjectivity. The kind of what looks like a compass in gold, like this is individual empowerment. You are just sharing from within. You don't really need any external prompts or invitation really to speak. Like you just have this like inner knowing that needs to come out. And then the one that's in dark blue on the right, that's actually tribal. So that's communication for like the benefit of the group. And what's not in your report, but we'll go through here, is if you, okay, so who's at 56, captivating narrator, awesome. I have that as well. And what you wanna do is go to the beginning of your report and look at your chart again and find on either side where that number shows up. And then look for the number after the decimal point. And if it shows up more than once, take the one that comes highest up first.
Can you repeat that?
Yep. So say you have the 50s, Nicole, I'm like looking in the chat, Nicole has the 56. So go back to the chart at the beginning of your report. Look on the left and the right-hand sides, those lists of numbers, and like if you're Nicole, like find where that 56 is. Yes, perfect, Nicole. 56.5, 56.3. Nicole, which one comes higher up? And like choose that one, just for the sake of this exercise, but there's definitely ways to dive deeper. Like in order from top to bottom, like which one shows up first? Like, is it the first number, the second number? Is it all the way at the bottom of that row of numbers? Cool. Okay, cool. On the right, 56.6, okay. Perfect. So you just want to look at these 11 numbers. If you have any of them highlighted, go look and see where, like, you know, where they show up and find the number next to it. And the number next to it, so like I'm seeing like a lot of 0.6s, 0.5. Okay, cool. You guys got it. So these numbers add an additional flavor or kind of like a deeper layer to your voice that also helps you, you know, resonate with your audiences more strongly. And you'll notice that even for people that have the same number, like someone has a 56.5 and someone has a 56.6, even though you guys have the same, you know, captivating narrator, I have a 56.4, the three of us are going to communicate in very different ways based on the role we play. So these are what the numbers mean. And I'll try to go through these super quickly because I know we're running up on time. If you're the expert, again, like you communicate with like facts, information, knowledge, you are studying deeply and you are like confident in what you communicate. On the flip side of that, you could probably suffer from analysis paralysis or be afraid to speak up if you don't feel like you know everything. If you have a number 2, you're kind of a natural. You just speak off the cuff. Things kind of come out of nowhere. You don't really know, but you just have this natural charisma that attracts others to you. And when people call you out, you might kind of feel a little bit shy, right? Like you don't really love being the center of attention, but you just kind of prefer to communicate naturally with the people closest to you. If you have a number 3, you are analysis paralysis is your middle name, Nicole. That's awesome. Well, now you know, right? Like how to kind of like use that not as a weakness, but like leveraging it as a strength, right? If you have a number 3, you're the risk takers. You might experiment. You might try different things, communicate in different ways. This could come across as chaotic or like resulting in miscommunication or misinformation. So just be careful. If you have a 4, you're an influencer. You're communicating like really authentically, and you prefer to communicate with the people who already know you. So you're probably really good at like building support and buy-in from your network before you communicate to broader groups. You don't love communicating with strangers because you're not really sure how they'll react, and you do fear that your ideas will be rejected by those that you trust. Yes, Nicole, this is the decimal point next to the number. Yeah. If you have a number 5 as that decimal point, you're the pragmatist. You are magnetic and persuasive, and you probably are really good at coming up with like practical solutions, universal messages, things that resonate with everyone. But your challenge is that if you fail to live up to high expectations or kind of overpromising, you can deal with like harsh and unforgiving backlash, and like people might lose trust in you. And then finally, 6, you communicate as the role model. So your communication matures over time, and really you communicate through the wisdom of your lived experience. You probably tell stories, or you have this ability to kind of communicate in an objective, detached way, and like not get heated by things, right? Or like kind of dive into the middle. And before kind of reaching midlife, so maybe in your 20s, early 30s, earlier in your career, you actually communicate more like the 3, like the risk taker. So you might be like trying a bunch of different things, failing forward, but as you mature, you kind of learn what works for you. Your number was a 5, but you feel like a 6 resonates more. Nicole, that might make sense. You might have, I can't remember, but I feel like you said you had the number twice. So that also makes sense. And then there's also different, kind of different ways that these lines can show up through your design, not just through your voice. And finally, I know we're at time, so we won't really have time to do this. Is you can kind of describe yourself as a leader, what your voice sounds like, by just saying, like, by putting the name of the gate, the thematic, right? Share your logic, share your experience, and then the line quality. So I have 2. Mine are the 45.2 and the 56.4. So I'm an abundance guide, here to lead the tribe with my natural charisma. And 56.4, I'm a captivating narrator, here to influence my network by sharing my own experiences. And so if we have all different mixes and matches of those, you can start to see how we all can embody our own leadership persona. I love that you love it, Elizabeth. Thank you. And I know we're at time, so I will jump forward quickly. I know some of you asked, how do we dive deeper? How do I know more? Please explain this to me. This QR code is direct link to my calendar. I'm opening my calendar for 1-hour sessions, so we can take what you did here today, dig deeper, and figure out how to implement it into wherever you are in your career. So if you are like kind of pivoting to your next thing and not really sure what that looks like, if you're thinking about jumping into entrepreneurship, if you're feeling just stuck and stagnant and you just like kind of want to find that passion again, if you want to grow within a current role, if you want to make your mark, if you just stepped into a new role. And the other thing this is really useful for is teams. If you have like team dynamics that aren't quite clicking, or something that isn't quite working, or you're a new leader of a new team and want to figure out how to bring people together, this can be a really powerful tool for that as well. And so we'll also make sure to follow up, I think, by email. So you guys will have all this information again, but please don't be shy, reach out. And then here's just a few other ways to connect with me. You can find me on LinkedIn, you can email me directly. And I write about this, about like how I connect human design to leadership on my Substack. And I want to thank all of you for spending your morning or lunch hour with me. I hope this resonated, and I hope that you're super curious about what this can mean for you in your career. Thank you so much, Mohammed. Good luck. Have fun in your sidebar circle. And then, I don't know, Kim, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if that's possible for people who do have questions. I can stop sharing my screen, but let me know.
Awesome, Lauren. We'll give it another minute just to see if anybody else has a question. If you do, just feel free to speak up now.
I was just curious, what was the slide between the fill in the blanks and this slide?
This is my my call to action.
Love that. Thank you.
But I think that by doing this work, right, by not pretending to be someone else, I think when we understand how we're naturally wired to operate, when we make decisions based on that, when we put ourselves in the right environment, imposter syndrome ceases to exist. Because who are we trying to be other than ourselves? And once you, like, that really clicked for me. when I dug into this work. And it's, again, going back to, there's no one who can lead the way you can lead. There's no one who's going to make the same impact that you can make. And why do we try to be the next Jeff Bezos? You're the first you, right?
I was just gonna say I love this because like I've known my human design, manifesting generator, like all that stuff, but it's too much. I have like books about it, but to be
Yeah.
able to distill it and have that like corporate career or just career element to it, and even just the way that you had the fill in the blanks, it just something about it clicked. So thank you so much.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. And again, feel free if you want to talk further, find time on my calendar. Would love to chat. Nicole, the 3Vs are value, visibility, and voice. So kind of the three things that we went through today. And again, this is like, it represents about 75 to 80% of your overall design, but all of these other things listed here are things that you can kind of learn or study or contemplate or interpret from your design. You're welcome.
How would someone that doesn't have any of the numbers highlighted do their fill in the blank?
There's a couple of ways. One is if any of them actually just resonate with you, if you're like, that sounds a lot like me, you can pick that. Or if you have any of these like kind of channels coming off. So I have, this is like a little small to see, but so the 23 for me is not highlighted, but the gate on the other end of the channel, this 43 is. So I might actually focus on the 23 because that means energy is trying to come in through that particular gate. So if you have any of those, that could be a good place to start as well.
Okay.
Otherwise, if you're completely open, you have that gift of being extremely flexible, but also learning a lot of lessons, right? And so kind of that learning through by doing and finding what resonates for you.
Perfect. And then what if one of the paths has like two colors, like
Yeah, that means you actually are activated on both your conscious and your unconscious side. So you might
I
have
have a lot of two
depending
colors.
where they fall in those lists. So like the numbers on each side actually mean different things. So it could be like how you live in integrity. It could be how you make money. It could be one of those core 4 that we talked about at the beginning, right? That are here about that, like they could be really integral to your purpose, right? And so it kind of where they fall also matters.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was really cool.
Anyone else? Recommendations for beginners. At the risk of sounding overly salesy, I'm happy to chat. This can be super esoteric, and I have translated and rewritten a lot of the language outside of the original human design because I found it to be really pessimistic and like overly masculine, and I really wanted to like make it more accessible, especially for like kind of corporate leaders. I'm trying to think. The other thing, Nicole, you might read is, this is a book that's a little bit more accessible, is The Gene Keys by Richard Rudd. And so he kind of goes through and talks about what each of those numbers mean on a deep level. And kind of each of the numbers, which I didn't mention before, but like kind of have a spectrum of like a really challenging, almost like shadow side, and then a wisdom side, and then our highest self. And so we're kind of like always aspiring to operate as our highest self, but noticing when we're operating in that challenge energy and how we can, you know, self-coach our way out of it. And then I forget the name of the book, but I think it's something like, this is the originator of human design. But again, his language can be a little bit hard to kind of penetrate and interpret. But please feel free, again, just book a chat. happy to answer more questions or help you make sense of the things in your report.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you so much for staying on another 7 minutes. And everybody, thank you so much for hanging on as well and asking some additional questions. Lauren, thank you for being generous with your time and your expertise. Everybody, have a great rest of your afternoon, morning, and everything in between. Thank you.
Thank you.